this is on the occasion of National Mathematical Day. On that day, there were many events, including a talk by Manjul Bhargav on Ramanujan, and that is why this has been shifted by a few days. So let us straight away come to the point that you see several savants from different fields have mentioned in a matter-of-fact way that about the origin of algebra in India. So I'll give you some quotes at the beginning. So let us start with Swami Vivekananda in a speech in 1895. You look at, in a matter-of-fact way, he says that India has given to antiquity the earliest scientific physicians. Even more, it has done in mathematics. So the achievements in medicine and surgery, you all know that's remarkable, but Swami Vivekananda puts mathematics even above that, the mathematical achievements. For algebra, geometry, etc., were all invented in India, just so much as the 10 numerals, that is the decimal step. So algebra was invented in India. That's what Swami Vivekananda is saying. Now look at Kajiri. So this is 1895. Now Kajiri, in his book History of Mathematics in 1919, he's saying both the form and the spirit of the arithmetic and algebra of modern times are essentially Indian. Go a decade later, Danzig, in the language of science, just says, is it not equally strange that algebra, that cornerstone of modern mathematics, also originated in India, and about the same time that decimal system did? So again, algebra originated in India. And now, this is also a pleasant occasion to introduce one of the greatest algebraists and algebraic geometer of the 20th century, that is Sriram Abhyankar, who is a pride for all of us. And you have, in my introduction, there was a talk about Nina Gupta solving Zariski cancellation problem, and Abhyankar was a student of Zariski. He is a pioneer in the area in which we work. So there was an article about Professor Abhyankar was writing about the history of resolution of singularities, in which he himself had contributed. So there was an autobiographical element in that article. So there he is recollecting his early days, embarking from the Bombay Pier. That is, he was traveling in 1952. Those days people traveled by ship. So embarking from the Bombay Pier, my boat took the same path by which algebra had traveled from India to Europe via Arabia. So he's saying that algebra moved from India to Europe via Arabia, and I am retracing that same path. However, you see in popular discourse, there is a certain inhibition in acknowledging about emergence of algebra in India. So there are two kinds of problems that you come across. One is that the algebra, the word, that comes from Al-Khwarizmi. So Al-Khwarizmi is Arab. Therefore, algebra originated with Arabs. This is a popular impression. And all this talk about India, that is probably not correct. This is among the what we call the popular notion in the media, newspaper editorials. If somebody talks about algebra in India, they will laugh at it. No, algebra originated in Arabs because the word derives from Al-Khwarizmi. That's one level of confusion. The other is that among scholars, they will say that no, algebra was there in Babylonia, it was there in Diophantus, and so on. So what exactly is the picture? So keep these quotations in mind. From you can see different fields. It is not, you see Abhyankar, he is a mathematician, top mathematician. Swami Vivekananda, I don't have to say who he was. And then you have the Western writers. In one is in history of mathematics, another in the about history of science. So let us get our ideas clear about what is algebra. when we say that emergence of algebra in India, so there are different aspects of algebra. And since it is a short talk, so I will not get into other civilizations. I'll talk only about things happening in India. But that so as I say, aspects of algebra in ancient Indian treatises. So as far as the title is concerned, emergence of algebra. So there the word algebra, I'm using it in the sense of number 2, what is called classical algebra. That is characterized by use of symbols, formation of equations. So this is language. See, algebra is not just about symbols and equations. The symbols and equations express some truths. But the beginning starts with symbols and equations. Then there is a number system, that is apart from natural numbers, you have negative numbers and zero. Solutions of equations. Now these solutions of equations that can be done using the language of algebra, that is using symbols, or they may be done by some other means, by words or by pictures. So we are not making that distinction. Then the point is that algebraization of mathematics, that is influencing other areas through algebra, and the sense that there is a distinct branch called algebra. Now, take this entire package. That is what I am referring to when I'm talking about emergence of algebra in ancient India. However, even before the use of symbols and formation of equations, you see strong algebraic work in several ancient civilizations, including Indians. So that, let me call it proto-algebra, to distinguish it from algebra in the form that we know it. So proto-algebra is something which is algebraic in substance. The essence is algebraic, but the external form is not. So in the Indian context, two examples are the geometric expressions of algebra formula in the Sulva Sutras going back to the Vedic time, and the algebraic ideas that you see in the decimal system, both the oral and the written, and in the Indian methods for computations. They are highly algebraic. They reflect strong algebraic mind. Now, this is proto-algebra. Now, this kind of proto-algebra you see in other civilizations like Babylonian, Chinese, Greek, although the Greek things come later than the Indian. But Babylonian algebra is that proto-algebra is of different type, not of this type. Now, what is that type? Let us not get into that. But these are things you don't see in these other ancient civilizations. This is something, this entire package 2, you see first time in Brahmagupta. Brahmagupta laid firm foundation of all aspects of what I have talked about, number 2, and his time is 628. And what is amazing is that the same Brahmagupta who gave the foundation for what we know as algebra, he anticipated what is called modern abstract algebra, or rather anticipated the essence of modern abstract algebra, that is formulation and study of composition laws. So just as you see that before classical algebra emerged at the time of Brahmagupta, there were algebraic thoughts in ancient civilizations, including Vedic civilization. But they did not give that form with symbols and equations. Similarly, Brahmagupta did not give the form of groups, rings, fields, but the essence of that he had caught. So it is like what the Vedic algebraist is to Brahmagupta, Brahmagupta is to the modern abstract algebra. And all this work is done in his chapter on algebra, which is called Kutakadhyay. It is chapter 18 of his magnum opus, Brahmoshpruta Siddhanta, composed in 628 AD. And since this is on the occasion of National Mathematics Day, let me digress a little bit. I was talking about Manjul Bhargav's talk on Ramanujan on the actual National Mathematics Day on 22nd. And there he was asked a question that apart from Ramanujan, has he seen the magical quality in the work of any other mathematician, which he found very inspiring. So of course, he was not prepared for that. So on the spur of the moment, the names that he mentioned, that was late Conway and then his own supervisor, Andrew Wiles, who solved the Fermat's last theorem, and Barry Mezu. Then he went to Gauss. And then he took a pause and then say, if I go even further, I'll mention Brahmagupta. And then he said quite a few lines about Brahmagupta and said that his work in 600, it just blows your mind. That is the phrase he used. And it is very sad that given the amount of work that Brahmagupta has done in algebra, that people are ashamed to acknowledge about algebra and attribute it to Arabs who come 200 years after Brahmagupta and whose work in algebra is absolutely elementary, meaning it is just nothing compared to what Brahmagupta had achieved. I mean, not only the Arabs, even the early Europeans, they were nowhere near the sophistication reached by Brahmagupta. So I'll quickly summarize because there are so many things that I'll be talking about that you may get lost. So I'll quickly summarize the foundational features that you see in the work of Brahmagupta. And some of these things appear for the first time. And those things are colored. Symbols for different unknowns. This is something which you see in Brahmagupta for the first time. If you see symbols for unknowns, that is for a single unknown, that you see in Diophantus. Brahmagupta is the first known mathematician who has prescribed symbols for different unknowns. How to form equations, algebra of polynomials, zero as a number. Don't confuse. Now people will jump at you. There is zero in Babylonia, there was zero in Maya, etc., etc. That is a place marker. That when you write 708, you have to put a mark to say that there is no coefficient of 10. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about 1 minus 1 is 0. Treating 0 as a number on an equal footing with positive numbers. So in the language of abstract algebra, treating 0 as an additive identity in the ring theoretic rules in the ring of integers. So that aspect of 0 is Brahmagupta's contribution to mathematics, or it may be there earlier in India, we don't know. But certainly it is formulated very prominently in Brahmagupta that he has a separate section on positive, negative, and 0, treating them on equal footing. And the so-called ring theoretic rules that are given in Brahmagupta for integers. And then, of course, the Gaussian method of elimination and the explicit general formula for roots of arbitrary as distinct from numerical examples. And then the climax, the binary composition on abstractly defined unknown set. And the point is that here for the first time, there is an announcement of algebra as a distinct important discipline. Prior to that, there were great algebraists. Even in India, we had Aryabhata. But Aryabhata has never declared, or at least not to our own knowledge, that there is a subject called algebra and this is what is called algebra, by whatever name. I mean, not the word algebra, but I'm saying that some Indian terminology. That is something that this algebra being defined and its importance being highlighted, separating out from the rest of mathematics, giving it a distinct identity, that you see in Brahmagupta. Diophantus is talking about arithmetic, properties of numbers. He hasn't announced algebra as a distinct discipline. And anyway, you know about Fields medalist David Mumford. In a personal communication, he has written to me. So this is independent. I am talking about in my way. Professor Mumford had written to me. He would be having his own thinking. It seems clear to me that Brahmagupta is the key person in the creation of algebra as we know it. in the creation of algebra as things in the mathematics of Vedic time, which you can certainly call algebra. But algebra as we know it, which I'm going to define, that what is algebra as we know it, we'll come to that. So that is something Mumford, after looking at various things, he has also come to this conclusion. Now, one thing we have to realize is that nothing comes in vacuum. So Brahmagupta gave the foundation of algebra. This foundation didn't happen in vacuum. There were factors before this birth of algebra in his hands. Factors were there. So let us look at the algebra in India, or what led to algebra in Brahmagupta, various aspects, including proto-algebra, including things which are not even mathematics, but which created conducive environment for the emergence of algebra. And these are things, I mean, what is the relevance, you may ask. One thing, students of mathematics, engineering, etc., they should realize, if I'm permitted to go a little out of this mathematics and science, today, this year is 2020, 100 years ago, Sri Aurobindo had, in a letter to his brother, had written about the cause of the backwardness of India. He said it is not due to poverty, it is not due to excess of religion or lack of religion, but in his view, it is thought phobia. The absence or unwillingness to think. In ancient India, they were just swimming in seas of thought, and here we have unwillingness to think. Now, this is something which we have to come out of consciously, that is thinking. So something like mathematics, let us say, this mathematics, it comes in the form of a bombardment to us, that an instructor comes and gives you some results. These are the results, you have to exercises you have to solve, which have to be done. I mean, that's not to be undermined. But how these things come about, that helps you to become thinkers. Otherwise, you may become just like clerks, that these are the rules and you just follow those rules. So in that light, you need to look at history, apart from other cultural reasons. I'm not undermining that. But apart from cultural reasons, you need to look at history as helping you to develop the art of discovery. Okay. So how, from ideas floating in the area, the great mathematicians get hold of the big ideas for the future. That could and those domains involve adjectives. So I'm not randomly writing down the identities which actually occur, not in the form of symbols, the way it is written here, but in the form of geometry. So let us start with the last identity. This can be seen in Katyayana's construction of a square equal in area to n times a given square. Now you remember that what made geometry so formidable during school days. So something like, let me give an example, something like you have to bisect a line segment of, let us say, length 10 centimeter. Now you can just take a ruler and then see where is the spot for 5 centimeter, put a dot there. and then claim that that is the point which bisects. That will not be allowed in school. You will not get any mark. You have to take a compass of radius more than 5, then draw a pair of arcs on one side and another pair of arcs on another side and join, and then that point of intersection is called the bisector point. And now this kind of thing, this bisection of a straight line segment is very easy. Now this is the kind of construction that makes geometry formidable. Why that has to be done? Since you are students of engineering, you will know that measurement intrinsically involves inaccuracy, and these constructions make things accurate. That is, by bypassing measurements, you hope to make more accurate constructions. And the Sulva Sutras, they talk about the Vedic rituals, the fire altars. They have to be constructed with meticulous accuracy for the mystic reasons, for spiritual or occult reasons. They have to be constructed with meticulous accuracy, and therefore that urge for getting accurate constructions led them to discover these principles which we now learn in school. So these are things, one has to learn, that why we can't use the protractor to bisect an angle, why we can't use a ruler to bisect a line segment, because this use of compass and straight edge, that makes things accurate. And why that necessary for accuracy was there, what was the cultural factor. So these make you better thinkers if you come to know this history. Now, what is Katyayana? This is Vedic. This is the mathematics of Vedic time. Nowadays, sometimes you say that I have read the Vedas and I didn't find any mathematics there. I mean, people like Nobel laureates go on telling these things in the press. You have to know that where to find the mathematics of the Vedic time. The Vedas perform geometry, the rituals needed geometry, which are described in the Sulva Sutras. You have to read the Sulva Sutras and you have to appreciate the mathematics. You have to know mathematics well enough to appreciate that. Otherwise, you will fail. So the last identity can be seen Katyayana's construction of a square equal in area to n times a given square. So this is exact construction of root n. Now see, what is this construction? So once you have side A, therefore you can draw n minus 1 times A. So suppose n is 10, then you can draw 9A. That is by your compass. Then what they say is that you also take 11A. So take n to be 10, let us say. Then you take 11A, 11 times A, and bisect that. Now with that, as one of the adjacent sides, you form the isosceles triangle. That means you take n plus 1A by 2 and draw arc, n plus 1 and draw arc, and see where they meet, and then take the altitude. That altitude gives you root NA. Now this is what Katyayana Sulva Sutra describes. So which means, what is involved here? So they are making use of the principle, that algebra principle, n plus 1A by 2. This is n minus 1A by 2, right? N plus 1A by 2 minus n minus 1A by 2, n plus 1A by 2 square minus n minus 1A by 2 square is NA square, which is what I was talking about here, that you don't see it written in symbols, but you see the principle expressed here. In fact, it is verily, just as you write the identity in symbols, here the identity is written geometrically, expressed geometrically. The construction is a geometric expression of the formula. So will you not call it algebra? So not algebra as we know it, but this is algebra. So let us call it proto-algebra. And another point is that you see that for convenience of talking, I was saying that take n equal to 10. This is the attitude you will see in all other civilizations. They take numerical examples to illustrate what they're talking about. And in the Katyayana Sulva Sutra, they actually talk about arbitrary number. They are not giving a numerical example. So there again, that talking about something arbitrary, that is again an algebraic mindset. And another construction, to give an example of Sulva sophistication of the Vedic geometry, that you are given a rectangle ABCD. You are given a rectangle ABCD. This is your given rectangle. Draw a square. So this is length A. The bigger one is length A. The smaller one is of length B. Draw a square of the same area. And Bauddhayana is the oldest Sulva author. So maybe 800 BC or so. So the kind of construction he tells you that you form the square of side B. So this is B. What gets left out is A minus B. Okay, bisect it. Then this part is A minus B by 2. And this part is B. This part is A minus B by 2. So the entire length is A plus B by 2. This one is A plus B by 2. Then he says that draw an arc. A plus B by 2 and extend this, see where it meets. So then this is also A plus B by 2. And this is A minus B by 2. Now they say that take this length. That is the side of the square whose area will be AB. In other words, they are using the algebra principle A plus B by 2 whole square minus A minus B by 2 whole square equal to AB. It's a geometric expression of that identity. This is something before Greece you will not see in other civilizations, but and Greece means it, you see it in Euclid, that is 300 BC. It comes later. And in fact, Seidenberg, who is a great algebraist, remarks that this is more in the spirit of Euclid than Euclid himself. Now, people will say that you have such things in Babylonia. Babylonians also give geometric constructions. But what Babylonians will do is the simple thing which I was suggesting, that you take, for example, A to be 7 and B to be 5. You just take root 35. That numerical example, whatever that comes. That will be that is their method. Nothing wrong with that. But that is not the same as this geometric algebra that you see in Sulva Sutras. And the amount of sophistication that is involved. So, so here I'm making one remark that this shows that awareness of algebraic formula and quadratic equations. Quadratic equations I have not illustrated, but there is an awareness of quadratic equations also in geometric form. But the difference with Brahmagupta is that identities and equations are yet to be formulated explicitly as algebraic expressions, even verbally. So the science of algebra, as we know it, is at best dormant. Now, this is not belittling the mathematicians of the Vedic time. In fact, this is their greatness. The mathematical greatness of Vedic savants is that they show algebraic sophistication before the genesis of formal algebra. So it is not their discredit that you don't see formal algebra. It is their credit that before formal algebra came up, which makes things easier, that they could conceive of, they could conceptualize such level of algebraic sophistication. This is like why Gauss is regarded as great, that before groups came up formally, he gave group theoretic ideas, group theoretic results. So one doesn't say that Gauss did not know groups. One admires him that before groups came up, he gave group theoretic results. Similarly, we admire the sophistication of Vedic mathematicians or seers who gave such algebraic results before the formal algebra of Brahmagupta. And we admire Brahmagupta, first of all, for giving the formal structure of algebra, and secondly, for anticipating composition laws before abstract algebra came up, 1200 years before abstract algebra came up. So these are things you have to remember. Now, that's the geometric aspect. There's another aspect of proto-algebra in ancient India, that's the decimal system. Now, algebra is basically identified with study of polynomials. Look at how a polynomial of degree n is represented. There are two ways. One is the more familiar way, a n x to the power n plus a n minus 1 x to the power n minus 1 plus a2x square plus a1x plus a naught. And you need not write the coefficient if it is 0. And another way of writing it is that you just collect the coefficients and then write it as an n plus 1 tuple. But here 0 has to be put as an entry if any coefficient is 0. So for example, there are two kinds of representation. So you write 2x cubed plus x squared plus 7. This is a polynomial, example of a polynomial. And you don't write, I mean, you may, but it's not essential to write it as 2x cubed plus x squared plus 0 into x plus 7. Normally, we don't write 0 into x. We write 2x cubed plus x squared plus 7. Whereas, if you write it as a fourth tuple, then you write it you have to put 0 and then you have to put 7. Otherwise, if you write 2 and 7, people will read it as 2x squared plus x plus 7, which is wrong. So you have to put 0. Later, with the decimal notation, then you write it as 2107. So don't you see that this decimal formulation, whether in words, as in Vedic time, or in notation, in fact, the verbal formation is closer to the actual, the usual polynomial representation. Don't we see that this idea of polynomial is dormant in the decimal system, and this decimal system is a highly algebraic concept? So this Vedic number vocabulary, this corresponds to, it's like the dasha corresponds to x, shata in x squared, etc. And the place value system. So this is just a 10-adic polynomial expansion. Instead of x, you have 10. Now, what you may think is that since decimal system originated in India, and since I am India, therefore to glorify anything Indian, I am putting that polynomial idea, I am reading polynomial idea in decimal system. You may think that, but let me now tell you something. That if you look at the history of algebra in Europe, polynomials and power series, they play a very important role. And one mathematician who is associated with polynomial in power series is Sir Isaac Newton. Now see that how Newton is advocating polynomials and power series, how he is teaching that. And that will tell you that these are conscious generalization of the decimal system. So his language is not very elegant, but you try to read it. Since the operations of computing in numbers and with variables are closely similar, I was amazed. So Newton, this is a problem with mathematicians like Brahmagupta, Gauss, Newton, Archimedes, who are far ahead of their time, that they don't, I mean, they have difficulty that why others are not seeing what I can see. I am amazed that it has occurred to no one to fit the doctrine recently established for decimal numbers. Mind you, what is the time of Newton? That is second half of 17th century. And decimal system got standardized in 17th century, just before Newton arrives on the scene. Decimal system was advocated by Fibonacci 500 years earlier, but there was political resistance, and it was delayed by 5 centuries. But by 17th century, it got standardized. So therefore, he's saying, fit the doctrine, that is decimal system recently established. Doctrine recently established for definition. Algebra is open to striking consequence. For this doctrine in species, species means, you know, like X is one species, Y is another species, Z is another species. So it's just variables. For since this doctrine in species has the same relationship to algebra that the doctrine in decimal numbers has to common arithmetic. its operations of addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and root extraction may be easily learned from the letters. So this language, as I say, it's not very elegant. What he is saying, Newton is saying that you see the decimal system. Why are you not copying the ideas from decimal system and form this algebra of polynomials and power series? Can't you see this? So now you see that what is the depth of algebra in the decimal system, and not just the decimal notation, the oral decimal system of the Vedic time. And this will make it clear that those who say I have read the Vedas and I didn't find any mathematics there, and this talk of mathematics in Vedic time is nonsense, you see that how stupid such statements are. And I was talking about Abhyankar. In 20th century, what is the relevance of ancient Indian mathematics? In 20th century, there is something called epimorphism theorem. That's one of the pioneering contributions of Abhyankar with his student, Mo. And then he has written a very elaborate exposition on his epimorphism theorem. So that is a 100-page article which explains all the technicalities in the epimorphism theorem. There he says the concept of a strict system of generators of a semigroup. Now, this is something you don't have to understand. This is a technical thing which he has introduced for proving epimorphism system of generators of a semigroup. Now, Abhyankar didn't have any inhibition to acknowledging things from the Indian past. So he says this is a generalization of the idea of decimal expansion. So you see, in the 17th century, Newton is acknowledging indirectly the role of decimal system in his polynomials and power series. And in 1977, Professor Abhyankar is acknowledging again decimal system for a concept which he is introducing. So there you see that the strong element of algebra, not XYZ, but really the soul of algebra in the decimal system of the Vedic time. Then you look at fundamental arithmetic operations that is taught in schools. Learning that is easy. That's the greatness of it, that learning does not require algebra. And so it can be taught early. But you distinguish between learning and invention. The invention needs algebraic insight. Look at the multiplication algorithm. So I'll go fast on this because we have to come to the main point. But you see something like a multiplication algorithm, somebody who invents the algorithm, he had to realize and make a skillful application of what is called the distributive property of integers. A into B plus C is A times A dot B. Unless you are very conscious of this action, you will not be able to invent this algorithm. Once you invent the algorithm, to teach it to others and to learn it is easy. So you need to make a distinction between the invention of decimal system, invention of the algorithms using decimal system with the learning. Okay, just because the learning is easy does not mean that there is no sophistication in it. So this is a key axiom for rings, and also the multiplication rules that they strongly involved the polynomial-like aspect of integers and expressed in decimal system, polynomial multiplication, plus you need an extra thing which is not there. In fact, polynomial manipulation is easier because there is no system of carrying over. And here you have additional thing of carrying over. So it is more like what are called p-adic expansion in modern number theory. So you have, so something like, let us say how 19 into 12, how that multiplication is done. So this is what is taught. Okay, 19, that you take 2, multiply 19 by 2, then you write 38, then put a 0 here, and then 1 into 19, you write like this. Taught mechanically. And students learn it. Nothing wrong with that. You learn this algorithm early. But what I don't understand is that when students learn algebra, then why aren't they asked to justify? Now, this is how that what I call overcoming the thought phobia, that learning to think. So students who learn algebra, they should figure out that why this multiplication algorithm was taught. I mean, why not why it was taught, why that works. Why the square root algorithm, which is taught in school, why that works. Some method is told to students. That method produces this square root, but why that should be the square root? Not just a verification by squaring. What are the principles involved? Now, these are things which students should think, at least those who think that they are good in mathematics. Now, coming back to this 19, you see that first of all, it has a polynomial expansion, 1 into 10 plus 9. All these things are not elaborated, but you look at the person who has thought about it, he had to think along these lines, that 12, that involves the polynomial expansion, 10-adic expansion. Then this distributive law is used, that separate it out. 19 into 12 is, first you do 12 is broken up in decimal, 2 plus 10, and then you apply distributive law, that this is 19 into 2, and then 19 into 10. So here you do 19 into 2, and here you do 19 into 10. So many ideas are condensed in that multiplication algorithm. So these things should be thought out, and you see the sophistication, you see the algebra there. Distributive law, polynomial expansion, and only a great algebraic mind could have invented such an algorithm. So you see great algebraic minds in India well before Brahmagupta, though the subject in the form that we know it, that probably hadn't come up. I mean, at least there is no record for that. And the one thing is that this will take too much time, so I'm skipping it, but I'll plead with you to think about the algorithm for square root, which origin goes back to Aryabhata. This is suppressed. So these involve these algebra identities. And you need to realize that this needs place value, this needs the idea of zero as a place marker. There are Chanda Shastra, to see the study of Vedic meters, and the famous Chanda Shastra by Pingalacharya. So there you see very sophisticated mathematics. I'll give some examples to illustrate what kind of strong algebraic mind they had. And you don't see such a strong algebra mind in other civilizations of that time. Sanskrit Chanda, first of all, you have to see the context, because this is not in any mathematics book. This is in a book on the science of meters. Now, Sanskrit Chanda has two types of syllables. One is called Laghu and the other is Guru, short and long. Now, rules in Chanda Sutra of Pingalacharya. They give you rules to attach to each Chanda a unique number and to recover the Chanda from the number. Okay. So this is like a coding and decoding. Because you see the Chanda, in ancient India, things have to be written on sand. So there is a danger always of thing getting muddled up. That is, if the sand, the curve that you are making, that suddenly gets smoothened out, then you gets lost. They used to call it nashta. So better is to get things coded. So to each Chanda, so Chanda is a sequence of Laghu and Guru. So you attach a unique number. And from the number, how to get back to the Chanda. So Pingalacharya has given rules for that. Now, those rules correspond to what are called binary number, representation of a number. So you are in an engineering institute, I don't have to explain what is binary representation of a number. So how to convert a binary to a normal decimal number, and how from a decimal number to go to its binary representation. Think of those rules. Those are the rules which are given by Pingalacharya. Pingalacharya is not telling you that to write a, number in its binomial expansion for its own sake. He is talking in the context of Chanda, the Laghu Guru sequence. So if you interpret Laghu as 0 and Guru as 1, then that is a sequence of zeros and ones. And with that interpretation, what you see is conversion of binomial, that we realize that Leibniz, this binary representation, which is given by Leibniz in early 18th century, and as a product, Finger's rules also imply progression formula. And there's another thing. He gives a rule which gives you how the number of let us say R Guru syllables, that means n minus R Laghu syllables. So that you know is NCR, the number of ways R objects can be chosen out of n objects, whose value we now know is this, and this value in 1,000 years before Hedigon. Not 1,000, 900 years before Hedigon. Now, that NCR, how to compute quickly NCR, that is given by Pascal's triangle. I hope you are familiar with that, but that is described by Pingalacharya, as which his commentator calls as Meru Prastara. Namely, this involves the algebra formula n plus 1 CR equal to NCR plus NCR minus 1. It's not written, the formula is not written, but that principle is used. That is, you take this. This is, let us say, this is 10, this is, so these are sequences of NCR. So this is all is 0, 1, 2. So this is like 5C2. How this comes up? By adding these two, 6 and 4, you form 10. So how this came up? This is 4C1 and this is 4C2. So 4C1 plus 4C2 is will be 5C2. So this rule is being applied. So you form these triangles like any point, it is formed by adding the previous two. Like 35 is coming as 50. Formula. Very, very restricted algebra. Don't see this level of sophistication in other civilizations of that time. I mean, there is sophistication in other directions, not in this level of algebra. And another power n, you know how 2 to the power n comes up, that all possible meters of length n. So that will be 2 to the power n. But how to calculate 2 to the power n very efficiently? And there, these exponential rules are used, that if n is even, you take 2 to the power n equal to 2 to the power n by 2 square, and power n equal to 2 into 2 to the power n minus 1. That means, see, n by 2 will not be integer if n is not even. So these are the two in which are at work. This I am telling you, it is not Pingala algorithm works is because of these two. So by this, you have this logarithmic kind of thing. What does logarithm does? Convert multiplication to addition. So similarly, this 2 to the power business is just converted into something very simple, that n, you take it n by 2 if n is even, and if n is not even, you take n minus 1. So let us illustrate with n equal to 11. So 11 is odd, right? So Pingala says subtract by 1 and put the symbol. This is just label. Put the label 0. Then what you get is 10. But 10 is even, so divide by 2. And for that, you put the label 2. So you get 5. 5 is odd, so you subtract 1, you get 4. 4 is even, so you divide by 2, you get 2. 2 is even, divide by 2, you get 1. And 1 is odd, so subtract by 1, you get 0. Once you get 0, stop. Just like your modern computer algorithm. And then there is a reversal. What is the reversal? So now you have to go from down. That whenever there is 0, you multiply by 2. And whenever there is 2, you square. So start with 1 double, There's 0, square. Sorry, there's 2, so you square. There is 2, square for that, 2 square square. So you get 2 to the power 4. But after that you get 0, so double, don't square, double. There's 2, square. There's 0, double. So this is how you reach very quickly. See the level of sophistication. And then compare with statements that I have read the Vedas, there is no sophisticated mathematics there. And this similar equations is a very profound, and this, when it was later rediscovered by Beck, that inspired Fermat to do his research in number theory, and it Fermat's famous in Aryabhata, and the Aryabhata's descent principle, kind of anticipation of that you see in the way the things work here. So you see the enormous amount of sophistication. Now let us come to as we know it. So algebra definition is symbols for unknowns. So there are two words, one is symbol and the other is unknown. Now this towards algebra, you see the use of profuse use of symbols in Indian culture. Think of the Sanskrit alphabet. You don't see such an alphabet anywhere else. And the phonetic principle of one sound, one symbol. So various sounds, ka is a sound, kha is a sound, ga is a sound. For that you have distinct symbol. And each symbol will represent only that sound. It is not like, you know, G can be ga or ja. Nothing like that. This is something which the mathematicians of India are growing up with. Panini's grammar, highly algebraic in structure, full of symbols and symbolic operations. Pingala, whom I just mentioned, he is talking about Laghu and Guru is very clearly, he's not saying what symbols to use, but there are very clearly symbols. Then this 0 and 2. So 0 and 2, of course, there are symbols for that, which you have to put. So again, there is symbols. Decimal notation itself, decimal notation is principle. It's not one. That V is there for 4 as well as for 5, and you know, confusion. Distinct symbol 4, this symbol 5, this symbol. That's the best of decimal notation. All this is preparing the mind. In Bakshali manuscript, which is probably 300 AD, there are symbols for arithmetic operations, which I'll show you just now. And Aryabhata, he comes before Brahmagupta, uses a fantastic symbol, fantastic way of expressing numbers, which I'll illustrate, which uses vowels as place value and consonants as digits. And there are terms for unknown, like in a Jaina treatise of 300 BC, you have the word yavat tavat for an unknown quantity. Aryabhata uses the word gulika. Brahmagupta uses the words avyak. Avyakta, unmanifested. Ishta, that which you seek. The terminology also talks about the richness. Now, Aryabhata's principle is like this, that for the vowels, you used powers of 100. Like, and you don't distinguish between short and long vowels, because when you talk, you can't distinguish whether I'm talking about Rasai or Dirghai in speech. So no such distinction is made between short and long vowels. So A is 1, E is 10 square, U is 10 4, R is 10 to 6, and so on. It goes. And then for the consonants, you have the values from, so the first 25 classified consonants, 1 to 25 in the proper order. And for the unclassified, you give the values 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, and so on. So something like M, that is 25, because m comes here, that's 25. But u means 10 to the power 4. So moment I say mu, that is 25 into 10 to the power 4. So such a big number is represented as mu. So that way they introduce very big, large numbers in astronomy. So this is that what are the things which are coming before Brahmagupta. In Bakshali manuscript, you see very thing interesting, that Sanskrit word for addition is yuti. So the symbol used is the first letter of the word u. Subtraction is kshay. So first letter is ksha, but ksha is complicated to write, so that's abbreviated as plus. So Indian symbol for subtraction was plus. Multiplication is guna, first letter is gu, so that is the symbol for multiplication. And division is bha, first letter is bha. So it's almost there. Now comes the emergence of algebra. So let us take all these details about Indian algebra. The real book to study is Vibhuti Bhushan Datta and A.N. Singh, History of Hindu Mathematics, Volume 2. The use of symbols, letters of the alphabet to denote unknowns and equations are the foundations of the science of algebra. Take that as definition, that use of symbols, letters of the alphabet to denote unknowns, and use of equations. And this is, as you all know, that this made a great step for rapid progress of mathematics. So earlier, you need real great minds to do such algebraic results, like in the Vedic. But those, those kind of proto-algebra will not lead to great progress, because you need somebody like Pingala to make some algebraic contributions. But after Brahmagupta came, algebraic contributions became easy. That's the difference. So Brahmagupta prescribes use of Varna. Varna means both letters of alphabet as well as color as symbols for different unknowns. And Prithviraj Swami explains it very clearly what it means. So already there is a word, Yavar Tavar, for the first variable. So abbreviated as Ya. Then for subsequent variables, color names like Kalaka. So take the first letter, that's Ka. So Ka is your Y. Ya is X, Ka is Y. Nilaka, Ni. This is a Lohita, all kind of color names, Lohita, Pitaka, and so on. So there's a, and then how to form equations. So there are terms for equations, and for to the power, the term used is gata, and the visible portion is called rupa. Term for coefficient or multiplied is gunkara, and equation, as you know, is called samikaran. So the plan for writing equations, let me illustrate. So this is coming in Brahmagupta. 10x minus 8 is x square plus 1. How they will represent it? So equality, there is no symbol for equality, because what they do is that write the right hand side below the left hand side. So 10x, that means there is no coefficient of x square. So x square is ya va is varga, ya is x square, coefficient is 0, ya coefficient is 10, and the visible portion is rupa. Rupa is abbreviated ru, that is 8 with a dot above to denote minus. And the next one is x square plus 1. Ya is 1. There is no ya here, there is no x here, so ya is 0 and ru is 1. Now, don't pounce upon them and say, hey, they didn't know how to write equations properly, there is no equality. Come on. There's a different way of writing, and this in some way, do you see that there's an advantage? Because when you try to operate, you see you have one here, and you kind of write it tabularly like this, the next step becomes easier. So you have no business to make fun of this way of writing equation just because it doesn't match with the way you have been taught in school. You have to be alert about that. So similarly, linear equation in several variables. 197x minus 1644y minus z is 6002. So now the other variables comes up, that ya 197, then ka 1644 with the do ni 1, and then rupa is 0. So this is how equations are being formed, and then of course the manipulations go by usual way. Algebra of polynomials. So we don't have time to read the Sanskrit verses. Brahmagupta clearly tells you how to do the algebra of polynomials. So in English translations, for the unknowns, there are squares, cubes, fourth powers, fifth powers, sixth powers, etc. Addition and subtraction are performed of the like. That means that, let us say you have 5x square in one polynomial and 7x square in polynomial, then you just add them, that 5x square plus 7x square, so the addition will. But as far as unlike, they you keep them separately. That is 5x square here and 7x cube. So that is expressed for the unknowns. Squares, cubes, fourths, fifth power, sixth powers, addition and subtraction are performed of the like. That means the same power coefficients you add or subtract, and the unlike ones, you just write them separately. That is as far as addition and subtraction. Whereas for the product of the two like unknowns, so you have x and x, you make it x square. If you have x, 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 product of three things, you make it x cube, and so on, or power of the designation. Whereas if you have unlike, you have x and then you have y, or let us say product of the two like unknowns, that means you have x square and x cube. So you product different unknowns, that he is giving a separate name. So x into y, just call it xy. The rest as above. That means the way, so polynomials has been described in words. Negative numbers and zero. Separate section. Atha dhana is positive, rin is negative, shunya. Sankalan. Combining now I'm telling you about positive, negative, and zero. And you see, negative numbers were called rina, that is debt, and positive numbers are called dhana, that is possession. So the people say that there is a strong influence of the culture of accountancy. You know, the Artha Shastra, it has a strong accountancy. So accountancy culture influenced the early emergence of negative numbers. And Europe, it emerged only in 16th century. That too, when the cubic solution to cubic equations were discovered, it forced mathematicians to take negative numbers seriously. Look at what the great mathematician Felix Klein says. Let us realize once and emphatically how extraordinarily difficult in principle is a step which is taken in school when negative numbers are introduced. Here, for the first time, we meet from mathematics. The complete mastery of this transition requires a high order of ability in abstraction. Felix Klein is saying this in the context of teaching, that to learn it, dear teachers, to learn negative numbers requires high ability in abstraction. Remember it and be compassionate towards the students. So if learning requires high amount of abstractions, how much abstraction is needed for the invention? Then Brahmagupta has the earliest use of zero as an integer in algebra. Zero occurs as a minus a. So you see a dormant modern algebraist, and you have all the laws of science, and you know, a into zero equal to zero. Then of course you have the solutions of equations, like I told you about Gaussian method of elimination, explicit general formula for roots of the quadratic equation ax squared plus bx equal to c, where a, b, c are arbitrary, not numerical. And he calls the solution of the topic of quadratic equation, what he doesn't call it quadratic, he calls it elimination of middle term. A very profound idea in modern mathematics. Elimination of middle term, which tells you that the so-called Sridharacharya's method, Brahmagupta doesn't tell it, but he is aware of it because he's calling it elimination of middle term, the theory of quadratic equations. Simultaneous, Brahmagupta just gives you the formula. Simultaneous quadratic equations, there is clarity and refinement in Aryabhata's solution of linear indeterminate equations, and then partial integer solutions of dx square plus 1 equal to, uh, this so-called Thales equation. And you contrast it that till 16th century, Arabs and Europeans had difficulty in solving problems of the type ax plus b equal to cx plus d, where a, b, c, d are positive numbers, which is clearly described by Aryabhata. Now, you see, the whole point is that they didn't know how to frame things in equation and process. So what I'm not talking about this equation, I'm talking about problems which we identify as being corresponding to these equations. They had difficulty solving these problems. They would guess the answer, then see what comes out, then subtract, divide. I mean, it's a very, what is called rule of false position, something very complicated. And then the climax, which makes Manjul Bhargav say that this magical quality of Ramanujan, where do you find it? Among others, he finds it in, among ancients, he mentions Gauss and then Brahmagupta. Why? I'll give you just example to illustrate the sophistication reached in ancient Indian algebra and how they are, at least Brahmagupta was doing proto-modern algebra, not modern abstract algebra, but proto-modern abstract algebra. So you have to solve in integers dx square plus 1 equal to y square. In integers, that makes it difficult. So what he does is he takes the more general equation dx square plus z equal to y square and prescribe a composition rule. x1, y1, z1 into x2, y2, z2 equal to, that means if x1, y1, z1 and x2, y2, z2 are solutions of this, then so is x1, y2 plus x2, y1, dx1, x2 plus y1, y2, z1, z2. So you look at an equation, this is a very difficult equation to solve, but with this, such is the power of this rule that you can solve it in a short time. So 92x square plus 1 equal to y square. So 92 at once gives you a triple, that 92 into 1 square plus 8 equal to 10 square. So you have 110.8 as a triple which satisfies 92x square plus z equal to y square. So what Brahmagupta tells you is that multiply 110.8 with 110.8, multiply in this sense. So you have 1 into 10 plus 1 into 10, that is 20. 92 into 10 into 10 is 92 into 1 into 1 plus 10 into 10, that is 192, and 8 into 8 is 8 square. So you have 92 into 20 square plus 8 square is 100 square. Divide everything by 8 square. So you get 5 by 2, 24, 1. Then apply the rule again and you get integers. So this Brahmagupta's binary operation is very intricate and involves two triples of unknown roots. And this whole approach of constructing a binary composition, this something comes very, very late in modern mathematics. And you see that to solve an equation in two variables, he makes a bold and far-sighted exploration of a more general picture. He he takes up an equation in three variables. This is something you don't see such attitude before Lagrange. Now, just to tell you that how sophisticated this is, that if you look at the maths education now, you don't study abstract algebra usually at the school level till class 12. It is only in the BSc level that typically abstract structures like groups are introduced. But Brahmagupta goes beyond that, though he doesn't define groups. At the MSc level, you would start associating structures to mathematical objects. Like to a polynomial, you associate a group, like Galois group. Brahmagupta goes well beyond that. What he does is something which you come only at a research level, that too, not everybody, those for us specialized researchers. Constructing binary composition on important sets. This comes at a very, very advanced stage in your modern mathematics education curriculum. And this discovery of laws like Brahmagupta's law is an important theme in modern mathematics research. So Brahmagupta is like giving you a composition law for this special kind of binary forms. This was generalized by Gauss for arbitrary binary composition laws. And you know why Manjul Bhargav, there are so many big mathematicians now, why Manjul Bhargav is considered special even among the leading mathematicians, leading contemporary mathematicians, because after Gauss, nobody suspected there could be other kinds of composition laws. And 200 years later, suddenly Manjul Bhargav came up with higher composition laws, which simplifies Gauss's work and gives you new composition laws for higher variables, which nobody suspected before. So this is one of the greatest achievements in modern mathematics. And this is related to one of the greatest achievements of ancient mathematics. And so when you come up with statements like, not in mathematics, let us say those of you who are interested in Indian culture, you should read Sri Aurobindo's The Foundations of Indian Culture. And if you know this history, you will be able to appreciate statements like this, especially in mathematics. India discovered much and formulated well and anticipated by force of reasoning some of the scientific ideas and discoveries. So something like Brahmagupta's composition law. Something like that, Europe first arrived at much later. How later? 1100 years, 1200 years later. But Europe was able to base more firmly by a new and completer method. New and completer, like Gauss, Brahmagupta is given for this kind of form. Gauss's new and completer method gives it more generally. But now Manjul Bhargav is going even beyond what Europeans had done. So this is hardcore mathematics. Now let me still say a few words about this birth of algebra in Brahmagupta. And this you again see in the context of Sri Aurobindo's statement in The Foundations of Indian Culture, that a remarkable feature of the Indian mind was to systematize and to found in each department a science, shastra, well-founded scheme and rule. When you read such a statement, the image that should immediately come to your mind is Ashtadhyayi Panini. So this profound Vedic literature is floating around, and then makes a science of language. Panini comes and systematizes it and finds it a wonderful treatise. Similarly, you see these algebra ideas floating around in the higher Indian mind. And Brahmagupta comes up, systematizes it, and founds a science that he does in Kutakadhyay. So why I would regard Brahmagupta as a founder of algebra? Because prior to Brahmasputa Siddhanta, there are principles and results which may be identified as belonging to algebra. But one is yet to see a conscious formulation of the science of algebra as a shastra, as a discipline, independent discipline. That leap is taken by Brahmagupta when he compiles a separate chapter on topics in algebra and emphasizes its importance. This you won't find in Diophantus, you won't find in Aryabhata. He is the first to compose a separate chapter on algebra in a treatise or define the subject. And the chapter begins with a statement regarding the indispensability, power of the subject, and it lists its core topics. So again, let me skip the Sanskrit. This is how the chapter on algebra begins. First, it talks about the importance. Since problems can scarcely be solved without Kutaka, his term for algebra, therefore I shall expound on algebra with examples. Then he defines what is algebra. List. By knowing well the pulverizer. Pulverizer means that solution of indeterminate equation one variable, which is not even taught in school. Zero, negative, and positive quantities. Things which are identical. Unknowns. X, Y, Z. Elimination of the middle term. That means quadratic equations. Symbols. Equations with one known. Equations involving X, Y. And the square nature. one becomes an acharya among the learned. That is, among the learned, you become special. So here, there is a recognition of algebra as a distinct and powerful branch of mathematics. And then at the end, he's talking about the delight of algebra and the glory of algebra and the importance of algebra. This is, so last page was, previous page was the beginning of his chapter. And now I'm talking about the end of his chapter. The problems which were discussed, these problems are for one's delight. From them, thousands of others may be formulated. The problems raised others may be resolved by the techniques stated here. Now, at that time, the real fashionable, like in 20th century, the fashionable subject was physics, and 21st century seems to be biotechnology. In his time, the fashionable subject was astronomy. So he talks about, in a meeting of astronomers, one who simply raises algebra-related questions dims the glory of others, like the light of the stars. How much more achieve is the solutions. So conjectures and solutions of conjectures. So you see that in his own way he is expressing the emphasis on the pursuit of algebra for, first of all, so this is the attitude of pure mathematicians, intrinsic mathematical importance, that in the, he is talking to the general public, so he talks about sukha matram, that is the delight. Is a code for intrinsic mathematical importance. Then it will generate new research. Problems, thousands of others may be formulated. This is a layman's way to explain to a layman. In sophisticated language, what he's talking about is generation of new research. And problems raised by others can be solved. That means applications. So the three aspects of modern research in mathematics, either intrinsic mathematical importance, generation of new research, and applications, all three aspects he is emphasizing and assures that this will bring you glory. And indeed, for several centuries thereafter, Indian mathematicians consciously focused their energies to the development of algebra. Then there is influence of algebraic thinking in other branches of mathematics. For instance, in Brahmagupta, tells you, how to simplify. So something like a mixed fraction is something very simple to understand. Therefore, I'm giving 1920 by 93. Since 93 is close to 96, which divides it, you just write it as 1920 plus 96 plus 1920 by 96 into this 93, and you subtract 96 3 from that. 93 from that to this. That is, there is a difference of 3. So what he is doing is, and so quickly you get 20 by 31. He is just using this algebra principle. So he is not, so he's putting it verbally, but this is the principle involved. Now, more sophisticated things are there. Constructions of triangles and cyclic quadrilaterals whose sides and areas are rational numbers. This is a topic by itself. Early use of arithmetic mean. Arithmetic mean comes in Europe in 17th century. In India, Brahmagupta was doing it. It is imparted algebraic trigonometry. Interpolation formula. Brahmagupta himself gives this formula for interpolation, that is how to read sines of intermediate angles from sine table. So you see finite differences coming out of the study of algebra, and these finite differences led to the calculus in India, the Madhavacharya school. So I have come more or less to the end of the talk. I just give you some another thought in this direction. This I am got while reading Sri Aurobindo's Secret of the Veda. The language that Sri Aurobindo used to describe the Veda. So the Veda is a book of esoteric symbols, just mark the word symbols, almost of spiritual formulae, which masks itself as a collection of ritual poems. So it's interesting that Sri Aurobindo is using very algebraic terminology to describe what is happening in the Veda. So he's talking about the Veda as a symbolic language. Symbolic language for, you see, it's a very long passage, so I'm just underlining the things that you look at. Expressing that which for the ordinary mind of the race was inexpressible. And then finally you see that it is a sort of divine algebra transmitting eternal formulae. So this gives me a thought that the Vedas is something which Indian mathematicians, they are steeped in that culture. So there, something is happening, right? They're expressing the inexpressible in a symbolic language, which in Sri Aurobindo's terminology, it is some kind of divine algebra. So when the divine algebra is in the air, as weird as it may sound, because to express subtle truth intangible to the ordinary mind, and use of symbols in later technical treatises to express the unknown quantity which is being sought. So Ishta, just look at this. The typical use is Ishta Devata, the chosen deity who realizes the seeker's aim. And that is used in mathematics. Ishta is the term for the unknown, the variable to be solved. What is Brahmagupta's description of x1 square, x2 square? Mulang dvidha ishta varga, ishta. And ancient Indians did not have any inhibition of invoking mystic metaphors. You look at Bhaskaracharya, the author of Bijganita. In his invocation at the beginning, he makes a pun on the word Sankhya. So he talks about the philosophers of Sankhya philosophy as well as mathematicians. Satpurusha, that is the spirit, God, or wise mathematician. Bija is root or cause as well as algebra. Vyakta, manifested universe as well as solution. Avyakta, unmanifested as well as algebra. So in the same words, he says, I venerate the spirit, the generator of intelligence, the cause of the manifestation, as I venerate algebra, which is the basis of mathematics and which reveals unknown numbers. So you see that analogy with mystic things. And then Narayana tells, as out of him is derived the entire universe, visible and endless, so out of algebra follows the whole of arithmetic with its endless varieties. Therefore, I always make obeisance to Shiva and also to Avyakta Ganita. And just the last slide, infinity. How Bhaskaracharya describes infinity. So again, he is using a mystic metaphor. There is no change in Khahara, that is Bhaskara's term for infinity, when any number enters, that is added to or leaves it. So he is saying infinity plus x or infinity minus x is infinity, just as the infinite immutable. So Vishnu is called Achyuta, that is one who doesn't change, remains unaffected when beings merge in him during pralaya or beings emerge out of him. So infinity minus x is infinity and infinity plus x is infinity. So finally, I end with, just as you said, Brahmagupta strongly advocating algebra, his successor, incidentally, just as Manjul Bhargav singled out Brahmagupta as a mathematician with a magical Brahmagupta's bhavna. So that is by the Chennai Heritage. Sorry, Tamil Heritage based in Chennai. So they have my YouTube talk. So Bhaskaracharya describes algebra as charming for mathematicians and astronomers, easily accessible to youngsters, is the essence of mathematics, and that I've demonstrated with examples. It is replete with excellence and devoid of defects. Learn it for acquiring wisdom and confidence. So this is how algebra, the importance of algebra was, I mean, not only the distinct identity, the importance after Brahmagupta, uniformly, the subsequent mathematicians had been strongly advocating algebra. And it's a great pity that we doubt whether algebra existed in India. That is a very, very sad state of affairs. So hopefully people with youngsters like you, there would be more awareness about the greatness of ancient Indian algebra, particularly the work of Brahmagupta. And as I told you that I have slides, I have lectures on both the arithmetic mean as well as the composition law of Brahmagupta separately. So thank you very much for your patient listening.
Thank you so much, sir. It was very wonderful. Thanks for sharing knowledge on emergence of algebra in ancient India. It was wonderful. If there is some query for someone, he can raise hand. He or she can raise hand. Who are from Facebook, they can also write if there is any question on in chat.
Acha, how do I go to this? How do I go to the general?
Pardon, sir?
Feeling lost. So sometimes it happens that immediately you may not be able to react, but later you may have questions. You are welcome to write to me also. My email is amartya, all small, amartya.28@gmail.com. Small a, small m, small a, small r, small t, small ya, amartya.28@gmail.com.
Recording will also be available on YouTube that I will share. And sir, sincere thanks to you for enlightening us. We look forward to welcome you in person in our university.
Yeah, I think
as the situation improves.
I think there is somebody is trying to join. Somebody has a question.
Hello.
Ishan Bangru.
This is Ram Subramaniam.
Yes. Okay, yes, sir. Ram. How did you manage to join?
Hello, Amartya. Yeah, I joined a little late. So the lecture turned out to be very powerful. I was quite happy. So I just wanted to acknowledge that this was a very fantastic lecture. Okay. So I joined around 12 when you were, I think, talking about Newton's. So the way you were reading his passage, I was quite impressed. Okay. Thank you. It was a nice lecture. Thank you.
You know the speaker, Professor K. Ramasubramanian, he is the person for ancient Indian mathematics and astronomy. He is a full-time researcher on ancient Indian science in Bombay IIT. And he has, and it's a great privilege for us that he has been able to join. He's now actually in Chennai, and he has wonderful books on ancient treatises. That is actually bringing out books edited by, that is the translations with commentaries, and some of them with his collaborators. They are also big people, M.D. Srinivas and his own PhD guide, M.S. Sriram. So the three of them are a big team. Ramasubramaniam, M.D. Srinivas, and M.S. Sriram. And Ramasubramaniam is another contribution he's making, which is really unique. He is training generations of youngsters formally. That means actually they do research and submit PhD thesis on ancient Indian astronomy or ancient Indian mathematics. They take up a treatise and bring it out. And so many of his students are now established in. It's not like us that who are doing things part-time. He himself is doing full-time research, and his students are also, he has produced students. So this is, we have a wonderful person. And another thing is, I should say is, another thing is unique is his chanting. So I have not read out any of the verses, that is due to time. But even if I had read out, it would not have been sounded very interesting. Whereas if you had heard, you would have got the melody of those verses that he brings out. I mean, he just sings them the way they should be. They are meant to be uttered.
It's
Oh,
a
Amar,
very
yeah.
Also
Thank
be
you
looking
very
for
much.
his papers, and things.
Amartya,
we
thank
will
you for the
request
kind
you to
remarks.
give some time for us.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add one sentence. So Amartya was mentioning that the three are doing some wonderful job. So this is like XYZ. So Amartya can be considered as T. Okay. So the fourth coordinate. So he has been doing remarkable work, though isolated. So these three are spatial coordinates, and he is like a time coordinate. So it's very well done. So I was quite happy, Amartya, I must tell you. Okay?
Thank you.
So it turned out to be quite well. So though you had some problem in the throat, and there were some interruptions in between. Perhaps this is my end or the general end, I don't know. But otherwise, it was very nice. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Professor Subramaniam, to be with us. And we will request you to give some time to us. I will come back to you. I will request you later. Anyone
Sure.
else?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Mahesh Kumar, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Yeah, it was a wonderful delivery, and
Thank you.
I read some ancient India history, and some foreign authors like A.L. Bosom and all, but could not get that much insight that you have given to us. And it's really wonderful to have it that our ancient mathematicians have done some significant work, but unfortunately, some of them may not be recognized worldwide as the European or some Greek mathematicians are done.
See, before worldwide, just sorry to interrupt you. Before worldwide, there has to be recognition from India. Among Indians, there is an undercurrent of a strong inhibition in recognizing. I mean, somehow, if I recognize ancient Indian mathematics, I become unintellectual. And there is what I call a cultivated ignorance. See, ignorance is something. If a person is ignorant, he can become knowledgeable. But if a person has cultivated ignorance, he can't become knowledgeable. So problem is, I think, let us not blame the Westerners. The problem right now is with Indians. I mean, Mumford is a Westerner. He has written to me that Brahmagupta is the key figure in the creation of algebra as we know it. And if you repeat it, people will ridicule you. There will be newspaper editorials ridiculing you. The editorial writers are Indians.
Yeah, that's the problem with the mindset sometimes. So
Yes.
So can we do something by including or introducing some of the part into our Indian syllabus, especially to the school children, or maybe in some place in the historian books, where we can introduce some of them so that our generations, they do not ignore them or they do not, forget them?
No, that's a very good question. So I have two different answers. One is that at the undergraduate curriculum, for example, in your so in the undergraduate curriculum, let us say in an engineering technology program, there can be an elective. Now, this is not something hypothetical. I was talking about Bombay IIT, where Professor Ramasubramaniam is a professor. He has been regularly teaching ancient Indian science semester after semester to proper IIT engineering students, not arts or this thing, the engineering students, and they are taking it with great interest. When I visit IIT and I go to his house, I mean, just full of students around him. So, so you don't have to, I mean, you have already model in the front. That is what is done in Bombay IIT. You can find out from Professor Ramasubramaniam how to go about it. There's a time-tested thing there. And IIT Gandhinagar is also trying to come up with a program. Or they may already have it. So that is as far as the higher level is concerned. You already have the model. At the school level, you don't have to do anything extra that is increasing the burden. What you have to tell the students is what I was talking about, that make them think and use history creatively to make them think. So for instance, they learn the decimal notation, decimal system. What is great about decimal system? That is something which they should know, then it will be interesting. And that will make them creative. That will make them thinkers of mathematics. So as I told you that this multiplication, the way multiplication is done, why that works, why the square root works. And at that time, you also tell that how Indians did things, because these things originated in India. Indians did not do exactly the way it is done now, because in India, now these are the things which I'm telling now is something I'm recommending to be told to school students, that this is how Indians did. So those things you can, for example, in the book of Datta and Singh or in my article, you can get the details. So Indian algorithm is based on the same principle as the modern way, but there is a slight difference in arrangement. Why the difference in arrangement? Because Indians used to write on sand. So there the figures become big, but erasing becomes easy. So the method was such that what are the figures which are not needed subsequently, they can be erased. And so you get space. In modern method, when pen, ink, paper was being used, then space was no longer a problem. You can go on adding steps after steps after steps, but erasing is no longer easy. For Indians, erasing was easy because of the sand. So therefore, naturally, there is some modification. Now, these will make things creative, that what is the actual Indian method and why and how it got modified. That will make them thinkers. And it will not burden them too much. And why, as I said, why square root? And then the art of this modern method that involves a slight contraction of the way Aryabhatta did it. Now, the way Aryabhatta gave the square root algorithm is something which comes very naturally. So that was the intermediate step. And once people see that, they can see that, okay, you can combine these two steps so that it becomes quicker. So this way you also introduce so in the school level, it is, you don't need to impose too much of extra things, but use the ancient Indian mathematics creatively to promote the art of discovery. And here I'll make another point, that ancient Indian among all mathematics, ancient Indian mathematics is the most relevant for promoting creativity among students. The reason is precisely because ancient Indians did things much earlier than Europeans. So I'll give an example. Like Brahmagupta, like for example, you cannot introduce abstract algebra, groups, rings, fields, etc., which is done in college. This is something you cannot introduce in schools. Okay. So what I'm saying is that if you look at the modern development of abstract algebra, that is discouraging. You tend to postpone it. But Brahmagupta's composition law, what I told you, that this is the composition law, and this is how you apply to, let us say, examples like 92. That can easily be introduced in high school. It doesn't really require much of mathematical preparation. Whereas it is something very profound, the principle of composition. So you see, you can get it for free. The principle of composition, which is at the heart of modern mathematics, that can be introduced through Brahmagupta. You cannot introduce it through, Gauss or Euler or Galois. Their things are beyond the reach of school. But because Brahmagupta did things much earlier than them, therefore it is done in a much simpler and consumable way at the school level. But the difficulty, I'll tell you what, I'm giving a rosy picture. The difficulty is that this will lead to a certain glorification. And there are academics who would like to obstruct it precisely because it leads to glorification. There should not be glorification. If you talk about ancient Indian mathematics, then you have to also talk about Arabian mathematics, Persian mathematics, Greek mathematics, Babylonian mathematics, Mayan mathematics, everything. Only then Indian mathematics can be allowed. Now, this is something which has to be faced, and this is a different area, which is not my area of specialization. How to deal with this situation, that there I'm helpless. I can just present that this is how mathematics can be, ancient Indian mathematics can be promoted, can be used to promote what Leibniz has said, that the use of history of mathematics is that the art of discovery should be promoted, and which Andre Weil advocated very strongly in ICM 1978. But if mathematicians here refuse to listen, I don't know what can be done.
Someone with name 807809, you can unmute yourself. You have raised hand by name 807809. If you are there, you can unmute yourself. Ishan Bangru, you can unmute yourself. Ishan Bangru. Yes. Yes, you can speak now, Mr. Ishan.
Sir, even I was surprised at the syllabus of class 10th that we were taught Sri Dharacharya method, and now there is no name of Sri Dharacharya in any of the book till 12th. Why deliberately we are not putting the Indian name over there? We simply say it's a quadratic solution now.
Oh, that is, can you hear me? Somehow, hello,
Yes,
can you
sir.
hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Somehow the screen has, anyway. So, I don't, no, that is precisely what I explicitly, that there is a certain axiom now, there should not be any glorification of the past. And for that, if the Indians, if suppose you mention about development, if it becomes inspiring, we don't want students to be inspired. But the first thing is that there should not be any glorification. So if you talk about Sridharacharya, first of all, I don't see why Sridharacharya's name should at all be mentioned. I mean, it goes to Brahmagupta. I mean, the formula The formula is given for the first time by Brahmagupta, who comes even before Sridharacharya. So why it is called Sridharacharya is Bhaskaracharya is quoting Sridharacharya. So this is just a digression. Sridharacharya in 750 explicitly talk about method of completing the square, whereas Brahmagupta is giving you the final formula. But because Brahmagupta is calling it the elimination of middle term, it is clear that his method is same as Sridharacharya's method. But in any case, the fact that Sridharacharya's name has been omitted now just tells you that what is the obstruction to introducing ancient Indian mathematics at the school level. I mean, why somebody has to come to a press conference and say, I have read the Vedas, my grandfather was a great Sanskrit scholar, and I have also read the Vedas, and there was no mathematics in Vedic time. Why a Nobel laureate has to keep on repeating it? I mean, this is something, you see, this unfortunately goes outside the scope of mathematics.
Thank you, sir. Now, I would like to request Professor S. Arunachalam, Director of Wind Engineering Application Research Center at JP University, to propose vote of thanks. Professor Arunachalam, sir. Professor Arunachalam, please unmute yourself.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Professor Amartya, it is my pleasure and privilege to propose a vote of thanks. And it has been indeed a very scintillating lecture on algebra, the emergence of algebra, and containing wealth of information. And I'm sure, like me, many of us would have been very much enjoyed and very much we have learned actually. You have given a very authoritative background, and the way how you have expressed, I have seen the Vedic algebra, the works of Brahmagupta, and the modern mathematics, Manjul Bhargava and other people, and you have elaborated many of these things, saying that much before the Western and other people have been talking about this. Many of these things have been given by Brahmagupta, which you have touched upon many of the aspects, right from polynomial expression, where you touched upon Newton and Leibniz. Then you talk about the Legu and Guru form representation, the Chandas and other things, and the Meru Prastara linking with Pascal and Pingalacharya's works on for the power series and other things. It was actually for us, even though as engineering students or engineering faculties, the way we know the mathematics is one issue, but you have made us to realize, and your thing has become very enlightening in us in appreciating how so much wealth is still unfolded to our level in Vedic algebra and other things. So that way, we are very, very thankful to you. Just to put it in one sense, I still remember in our school days, one of the inspectors, when they came for the thing, he only said that, I mean, we were all 8th students. I give you 4 5s, make it 100. You can multiply those things. These are all simple things, but of course, I didn't answer. My friend Joseph answered 5 plus 5 into 5 plus 5 is 100. And he was very much happy. He was saying 5 into 5 minus 5, and again into 5 also will run 100. These types of small things which you have said, that inculcating the beauty which are lying in mathematics, we have to, as teachers, we realize that what little we know, we have to incorporate, we have to inculcate in the students other things. And I have been able to see one thing in your lecture, that your passion for learning, understanding, appreciating, and acknowledging, and more than that, giving the authoritativeness and authenticity to the seers of Vedic period, where they have given what is this wealth of the algebra. That much I've been able to see, and more so, your expectation on us, our youngsters, our faculties, and the future generations to appreciate that. So I'm able to see a patriotism in you when you are talking about the algebra, and that is the birth from the edge. I mean, it is really wonderful. We are very, very thankful to you, even though on the subject wise, I am very small in commenting on that, but I'm able to see that you have brought us to the light that, yes, there is a treasure. Please, when we have time, please look into this type of thing, where you have talked about the Ashtadhyayi of Panini grammar, or whether it is a Kutakadhyayi by Brahmagupta, and again touching upon Aurobindo's book on the foundation of Indian culture. These things are very relevant, very important, and on all my behalf of my own thing, particularly from our own JP University, on behalf of our Vice Chancellor, Professor J.S.P. Rai, I would like to, it is my privilege to give a thankful to this one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Datta, Professor J.S.P. Rai, and everyone present here for giving your precious time to us. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.